everybody. This is Marilyn, the CEO and founder of Cosmic Centaurs and your host for the 4th annual edition of the Cosmic Conference. Very excited to see you all with us today. This year, our conference was over 5 weeks and included both in-person and online sessions in the UAE and Saudi. Our focus in this conference is to help you lead organizations that deliver, and we've explored this through 5 sub-themes: strategy execution, scaling, transformation, capability development, and this week through restructuring. We started on October 6th. We end at the end of the week on November 10th. I've been joined by thought leaders and academics who have shared their insights and will continue to do so in today and Friday's session for a total of 12 online sessions and 4 in-person events. This is our 11th session and the one before last. In case you missed any of the previous sessions, they're all on our website and on YouTube. All of this is free to attend and available for you, for our members of our community. As I mentioned, we're in the last week of our conference, and this week is all about right-sizing. Restructuring is like giving a business a restart in a video game if you get it right, but it's a very painful restart, usually initiated when businesses are facing financial pressures. And restructures are turbulent for an organization. They're not always successful. Actually, more than 80% of them fail to deliver the value they're supposed to in the time planned, and 10% even cause damage to the companies. Usually they last about 10 months to a year from plan to implementation, but it's a time that is incredibly difficult and sensitive. Leaders are shaping attitudes, behaviors, and performance of both the organization and its employees throughout this process. And 60% of organizations experience plummeting productivity due to the uncertainty around job loss and resistance to change. But productivity is just one of the challenges that leaders face through a restructure. And we're going to unpack this today. And we're going to unpack the role of leadership, which is really primordial. They're responsible for providing a vision, a strategic direction, but also clear comms, leading with empathy, taking on the anxiety of the organization. There's a lot to do when you're leading a process like this. And that is why today's session is called Leading Through a Restructuring. As always, before we begin, show us some love, give this video a like, tag someone who you think might enjoy it. And then please do share your questions and comments. We will try to get through them with Rabih and Alex before the session ends. And as you can see today, I don't have one, but I have 2 guests from our partners at Tandem. Tandem is a Dubai-based business advisory firm aimed at startups, SMEs, and angel investors in the region. And joining me today are Tandem's Rabih Brair, co-founder, and Alex Damouni, who's a partner. Rabih has 15 plus years of professional experience in financial and strategic roles across multiple sectors to the benefit of startups, SMEs, and family offices. As for Alex, he has extensive experience in managing large cross-functional teams and projects and is highly resilient and manages operational challenges and uncertainty for businesses in transition. And he's done many restructurings in his career, and we'll talk about all of that today. Rabih and Alex, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm very excited. Restructurings are one of those really difficult things to get right. And I'm excited to help people figure out how to get them not to suck as much as they do. And with that, the way the session is going to be structured today is we're going to have you guys, you've prepared a presentation for us. So you'll walk through that for 10, 15 or 20 minutes. And then after that, I have lots of questions for you, but I'm also sure the audience will have contributed questions. And I look forward to having a discussion. But for now, I hand this over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. I'll let Alex do the intro of a case study we were lucky enough to be a part of. So this is an actual project that we handled some years ago. I'll let Alex introduce it, and then I'll jump in with some of the specifics.
Excellent. Thanks, Rabih. So we had a client who was a consumer goods manufacturer, and they manufactured all sorts of products, but one of their flagship catalog brands was cosmetics, hair products, skin products, different facial products, and they would distribute these products to different size retailers, small, medium, large, as well as your big box retailers. So for the purpose of this discussion, we have given the client a case study name. So we've called them Evergreen, like the evergreen tree. The challenges that we faced at Evergreen were common to many companies that were struggling. So in summary of the slides, the pain points are up there. Starting off, there were slow-moving products within their catalog that led to a buildup in inventory. So, for example, they had 40 different SKUs, different types of products filling up the shelf space, and their logic was that they wanted to be able to fill up the real estate on a retail shelf. They were competing against other brands, so their idea was that they wanted to just have as many products on the shelf as possible, so that way the other competitors won't. But the trade-off of that strategy is that money gets stuck in a lot of the slow-moving products. Evergreen was also experiencing a negative cash cycle, meaning that they had 30-day credit terms with their suppliers, but some of the retailers won't be paying them for 90 days, even 120 days. So they would go through 3 or 4 inventory cycles before getting paid. The sales team themselves were getting paid on invoiced orders. So their commission was on the actual sale, not on the actual collection. So there was no real incentive to collect the money. Margins were also painfully thin on some of the products. So they would really depend on volume in order to become profitable for those categories. And sometimes that volume never came. Excess capacity was also a problem, so they were paying for a lot of underutilized space. So it was this perfect storm. And at the same time, the employees themselves had a lack of clarity, on their strategic vision of the company, what the company represented. Some of their flagship products that were doing actually really well in the store didn't really have a brand identity. So that uncertainty or that lack of clarity also spilled over into the market, and consumers were also even getting confused. What does the brand represent? What does the company represent? So there were a lot of moving parts, which is typical within any restructuring, and we were hired to make sense of all of this. Whenever you're faced with these types of problems, you try to simplify them. So you try to categorize them into different buckets and then deal with these buckets in a piecemeal manner. Not one solution in one company may not necessarily work in another company. Each restructuring is different. But fortunately, there are frameworks that can help companies go through a restructuring process. And the one that we used is one that my business partner, Rabih, will be speaking about. Over to you, Rabih.
So Marilyn touched on how painful a restructure can be. It's a long, drawn-out process with uncertain or even low rate of success, to be completely honest. There are financial challenges, there are people-related challenges, there are even resource-related challenges. And to be completely realistic, I'm going to add that disclaimer at the beginning, because the slides really were made to fit into this, sort of platform today, into a certain time allocated to us. But it's important to insist that restructures are a very difficult decision to even arrive to. And typically, when you do embark on that journey, it requires at least one dedicated resource to lead and hold people accountable to what needs to be done. It needs a lot of time. Marilyn mentioned about a year, and I think that's about what this particular case study was. But also, it requires a sort of last-ditch purse, so it does require some sort of budget dedicated to the framework. It's not something that's free. Sometimes you're bringing in external help, like what Evergreen did when they brought us in. And I'm sure we'll delve into those sort of challenges and definitely the human side of things during the Q&A. What we're gonna focus on for the next couple of slides is really the approach. This particular framework is called the Cash Profit Growth Framework, and the idea is to start with fixing the basics. Start from the beginning. The first two levels are purely tactical, and really they're about ensuring your ability to keep the lights on, pay your rent, pay your salaries, and just keep going. It's literally the most basic, sort of food, water, shelter for the company type of approach. Like I said, the first one is freeing up cash. So really, the company needs to have readily available funds to meet the obligations to keep going over the next couple of months. We're talking really short term here. The next tactical step is profit, and this is really about ensuring that that cash that you're getting your hands on is sustainable, at least for the foreseeable future. And then at the top of the pyramid, you have a more strategic thinking, which is the growth. So there, you're looking at a longer term horizon. You're really steering the ship in a more thoughtful way, rather than just avoiding the icebergs that are right in front of you right now. So if we look at improving the cash flow, there's a couple of initiatives that we did specifically with Evergreen. I'm going to try and relate all of these initiatives to the case study. Alex mentioned the slow-moving items. One of the things that we did was propose discounts and bundles to get rid of those slow-moving items. Essentially, from a financial aspect, what these slow-moving items are cash sitting in your warehouse. It's locked up cash that you're not able to utilize in a much more meaningful way. It's also storage costs. It's also all of the costs that come along with having sitting on that kind of stock. So the first initiative was discounting the items straight up, or bundling them with fast-moving items that we knew worked well in the market. The second initiative was looking at the portfolio in a more macro level. So we had to analyze both margins and the speed at which certain products were moving. And here you have to be a little bit cutthroat. And the challenge obviously here is questioning and challenging the previous logic and rationale that management had when building this portfolio of products. So Alex mentioned that we'd had 40 SKUs. The idea was definitely to reduce them according to those two main criteria, which is profitability and the volume with which they were being sold. There was an opportunity to look at some of the items that were a decent margin but weren't moving fast enough. There was opportunities there to relaunch and rebrand certain products so as to increase the volume of sales while not affecting the margin in any significant way. I think the example I remember was a hair product that was that had a certain red packaging and a really strong fragrance, and after a little bit of head scratching and a little bit of focus groups, it was relaunched with more natural looking colors and a lot less fragrance, and that repositioning resulted in, I think, a 30% volume increase within the first year, if I'm not mistaken. Alex, right? It was 30% increase on that particular one. So that was a good example of rethinking what you already have, and that was somewhat working, but just kind of pushing it over the edge to make sure that it's one of your keepers. The third initiative is offering your customers, basically in this case the supermarkets and the retailers, offering them discounts to pay you much sooner. You can't exactly go back on your previous credit terms that you had given out. What you can do is incentivize them to beat those payment terms. And at the same time, we address that glaring omission of not paying your sales staff based on collection, which you can't simply reward someone for the invoice. There's a whole host of problems that can come from that. The fourth initiative was talking to your suppliers. So in our particular case at Evergreen, we're talking about raw material suppliers, and here it was two difficult conversations to have. One was very difficult and one was just difficult. The very difficult one was renegotiating payment terms from 30 days up to really whatever we could get our hands on. That was kind of the approach, is even if we can get 5 days, then it's still 5 days. And the other one was kind of just rethinking the minimum order quantities of those raw materials, and not necessarily ordering in the kind of bulk that we were previously ordering at, and kind of minimizing the premium that we'd have to pay for smaller orders that would arrive just in time, or at least working towards just in time. Just in time is not something you can achieve overnight. So those were the 4 initiatives. All of them have a pretty direct and not insignificant impact on cash. So you're freeing up inventory. You're reducing you're reducing your receivables, you're kind of increasing your payables, but also you're thinking about what it is that you're going to sell in a much more sort of thoughtful and meaningful way.
Excellent.
Alex, yours.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one important aspect here is that when you're looking at it in steps or in stages, you're always thinking about the next step while doing the first step, because you never want to cannibalize opportunities in the future by taking care of the present. So that's also another challenge. So when we're talking about discontinuing products, we want to make sure that these are the slower moving products. These are the lower margin products that we are taking off the shelf. So really categorizing the products into buckets initially is really important. So, you have your fast moving, high margin product. Those are your stars. You have your slower moving but higher margin products. So, you have those as kind of there that are somewhat of a cash cow. But then you have, your slow moving, low margin products, which really doesn't add as much value to your portfolio. And that's where we start trying to discontinue. When we're looking at the higher margin products that may have some potential, as Rabih had mentioned, the rebranding component really comes into play. Can we relaunch this product under some type of brand? Can we do small tweaks to the product? And that comes back to speaking with your customers, speaking with the retailers, having your representatives at the retailers, and then reverse engineering to see whether there is a possibility of relaunching, not necessarily just taking that decision to relaunch. I mean, there definitely has to be that engagement with the market just to ensure that there is that product market fit potential before relaunching that into the market. The third aspect is we're touching more upon the human element, which is the staff or the people. A lot of people, they associate with restructuring with downsizing. That's the quickest way to cut costs, is just to downsize. There's two problems with downsizing right away. The first is that it violates the first step in the sense that you need to have a big cash payout, which is paying out the severances of all the employees that you want to downsize. And the problem with that is that you're trying to conserve cash at the same time. So the first thing that we always try to do is we look at the roles of the individuals and see, can we repurpose those roles? Are there enough salespeople in the market? What's the ratio of salespeople vis-a-vis the rest of the organization? In our case, it was only 5%. Right. So only 5% of the salespeople were doing the heavy lifting for the rest of the organization. So then the question then becomes, well, do other people have those interpersonal skills, have enough product familiarity? Does it align with their career goals? Can we put them out into the market? Can we change their incentive plan in a way that, it gives them a lot more upside potential if they are really good in the market vis-a-vis, just having a base salary? So that discussion then starts happening, is that how can we increase it from 5% to 8%, in terms of sales force ratio vis-a-vis the employees? How do we get it to 10%? And the other discussion becomes is that, okay, we have a liquidity problem. We have a cash flow problem. Can we repurpose some of the administrators into a collection department? Maybe we need to create a collection department where we then can support the salespeople so that the salespeople can really focus on selling. And then the collection department can kind of reinforce the salespeople on what they're doing by providing that additional layer of support for the more difficult clients. So, that's where the repurposing starts coming in. And that obviously comes in with a whole dialogue with all the staff, just to make sure that what they're doing makes sense to them. And then they have clarity that, how important their role is within the bigger framework of the organization. And then the last component is, once you do have that higher margin product that is in more demand on the shelves, you can really start reinforcing that relationship with the retailers, greater retail collaboration. Yeah, we can participate in your catalog promotion this month. We can give you an extra discount for this holiday season that is coming up. So there is that opportunity with the higher margin products where you can sacrifice a bit of that margin for the sales in that season, where it is common that consumers do expect some type of discount or some type of promotion. And then ultimately the final objective is bringing all of this together hopefully seeing that profitability, which is essential when you're getting into step 3, which is scale. So, step 1, we have the liquidity taken care of. Step 2, we have the profitability taken care of. And now we're transitioning into step 3, which Rabih will again touch upon, which is the scalability of the business.
So you've gone through months and months of internal turmoil, bleeding cash, trying to recoup cash, really difficult conversations with your staff, with your customers, with your suppliers. You've made it, hopefully this far with some fails and maybe more wins. And the idea is to be able to, like I mentioned previously, look at a horizon that's a little bit further than just, can I make payroll at the end of the month, and what objectives have we hit, and what have we failed on. The first one, well, we're back to the core offering, that famous portfolio of products of Evergreen, where we started with 40 SKUs, trimmed it down to 25 with, it was like pulling teeth. And from there, started rebuilding the portfolio based on volume and margin. The idea wasn't to cut it down from 40 to 25 and just leave it there. The idea was to cut it from 40 to 25 in order to stop, quote unquote, bleeding. And then based on those, sort of fundamentals, rebuild again based on volume and margin in our specific case. But the idea of volume and margin, I think, applies to a lot of businesses. Once you have you get your head around the idea of your portfolio and your sales mix, you can then you scratch the surface a little bit more, dig a little bit deeper, and really look at your capacity. In this particular case, we realized that there was excess capacity at Evergreen, both on space, on machinery, on people. And the idea was, okay, well, if these are our resource and asset constraints, what can we do to maximize the returns from that? What can we do to maximize revenue based on those revenue producing assets? In our particular example, the solution was white labeling or producing OEM products specifically for the supermarkets and the retailers that were selling our products, that wanted to widen the offering of very specific products that they saw as high volume and high margin. And what ended up happening was Evergreen's products, as well as their OEM, supermarket label products, were selling alongside their competitors' products. The idea there is that without Evergreen's brand being, horizontally expanded on the shelf, it still created new revenue streams on a manufacturing level. And really, really importantly, it was excess capacity that was being filled, and not necessarily significant new investment going into this. Now, obviously, this might entail some investment at some point, but the idea is to fit any sort of new capacity solutions to the assets and to the constraints that you have, and not necessarily build an entire new production line, for example, for white labeling. The next step after that was, entering new markets. Now, this could take on several different realities depending on the company. In our particular case, Evergreen signed on distributors outside of their geographical market, as in new countries and in new areas within the country that they weren't present on before. So really, this was a business development effort to scale the volume, widen the footprint, and increase the number of points of sales where Evergreen products were available. I think for other businesses, this could look, really different. It could look like, you're all of a sudden going to sell direct to consumer online, or you're going to offer something. Well, let's say you're a tech company, and all of a sudden you're gonna offer software as a service. I mean, the examples are, can be developed on. But in our particular case, it was white labeling, and it was going out into new markets. So it was vertical, it was horizontal, and it really did work out really, really well in terms of the volume impact that it had on the business. We mentioned at the beginning, well, actually Marilyn mentioned at the beginning, some of the stats when it comes to turnarounds and restructures. And I think looking back, I think we were very, very lucky to be a part of this particular one, because it did turn out to be successful. What the slides don't touch on was the, sort of human element of it, both on an ownership level, an ownership and management level, as well as the, we did touch on the HR level, but on a personal relationship with the owners and the management. This is a whole other set of challenges for the turnaround or restructure champion. And in this particular case, Tandem, Evergreen was a family-owned business, and they were also in the early stages, I'd say, of a first generation to second generation transition. So there was a lot of complications when it came to trust and empowerment, and favoring Tandem's voice over the second generation's voice. A lot of really complicated sort of intricacies to this. And I really don't think this was more complicated than any other restructure or turnaround. I think every single one is going to come with its own set of sort of challenges, both on the technical side, on the financial side, on the HR side, but also on a very personal human side when it comes to the owner and managers of the business. I'm sure, Marilyn, you'll delve into that with a couple of questions, but the generational family business thing was definitely an added kicker to how complicated this was. But in terms of the framework, that does cover sort of the very simplified and sort of an illustration of the three stages of the framework. So at this stage, I guess I'll hand it back over to you. And questions, Marilyn?
Yeah, I mean, I love this stuff. First of all, thank you so much for being so generous and sharing, so much about one of your own experiences. I think we don't often get the chance to really do that, or to listen to, fellow consultants kind of unpack their own work. So I think there's a lot of generosity in that. We're very grateful. And it's really nice because you're able to answer, I'm sure you will, and I will ask you a few, but I think even in your presentation, it was really nice to see both the kind of high level conceptual stuff, but also the low level details, because actually I think that managing any transformation, but particularly a restructure, is about being both very high level and very low level at the same time. And I think in your presentation, you really showed that capability. And so I'm sure you'll give us more as I come at you with all my questions and the questions from the audience. We have a few of those as well. But you kind of started to answer that towards the end. But if each of you could pick, the top two most challenging elements, internal elements of a restructure, you definitely spoke about generational kind of struggle in the case of this family business. But if you had to pick your top two worst internal challenges, not the market facing ones, but the internal ones, what would you have picked?
Shall I go first, Alex?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think the reality of running out of cash is just, I mean, there's no harsher, colder truth than that when it comes to a restructure or turnaround. That at the end of the day, you run out of cash, you're done. There's no saving you, unless you pull out a rabbit from the hat in some sort of miracle. But really running out of cash. The other one I would say is definitely the sort of the people element, and you need to really put yourself in these people's shoes to really start unpacking the layers of uncertainty, doubt, ambiguity, resistance to change, wanting to do something but not necessarily, being able to. So for me, including management and the team in a restructure from day one and not imposing it, I think is a real challenge.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, I worked for a company for my longest work experience was for a company that ended up filing for bankruptcy after 10 years. And it was an incredibly painful exercise. But also, I really think this point about you have to do it before it's too late, and that cash piece, because, and you said it very early on in your presentation, and I made a note to highlight this because I thought it was such a important point, is that a restructure requires a budget. So if you wait until that budget doesn't exist, then you've already doomed yourself for failure.
Yeah, it's not a magic potion, right? You can't come in and kind of apply this this framework and you're going to dig yourself out of a hole. It's you need that foresight. You need to accept that you need a restructure. You need to plan for it, and you need to budget for it, for sure.
And just before I go back to Alex with my first question, but what are some, like, at what moment should one pull the trigger? Like, is there, you know what I mean? Like, how do you, if someone's like sitting here saying, maybe they're in this case, maybe they think their company is headed that way. Like, when do you pull the trigger, and how do you convince others that it's time?
I think as soon as you realize you're on this slippery slope where where you're doing things but they're not quite paying back. You're taking initiatives, but nothing seems to be changing, or it's not changing enough. As soon as you are able to face that reality, you need to seek help.
Yeah, it's also if you're using borrowed money to cover operational expenses, that's when you start seeing, look, there's a mismatch here. Whether that's financing, whether that's investor money, whether that's bank money. If you start using that to cover your operational expenses versus using it as a line of credit to be able to buy product, towards revenue generating activities. I think
exactly. Oh, that's such a great, it's very simple kind of trigger. Alex, what are the two challenges that you find to be the most difficult to address?
I mean, look, I think Rabih touched on both of them, but I'll just dive a bit deeper on one of them, which is on the people side. I think it's the first aspect of the people side is coming to terms with the reality, because not everybody is aware. Some people do suspect, but they do probably think, oh, we'll just get another investor, or we'll just get another, support in some capacity. So I think it's coming to terms with that reality. And then the second aspect of it is buying into the future. It's like, can we actually pull out of it? I think those two factors are really, really challenging, because it's not a one-person show. When you go in and restructure, you have to work with a team of people, the people that have the experience, that have the relationships, that have the technical know-how of the business. Yeah. And, and have those type of frank conversations with them.
You're reminding me, I think it was an IBM, maybe when, if I'm not mistaken, when was it Lou Reed that restructured or turned around IBM? One of the things that the CEO, I think it was him, but one of the things that he did was he asked their accounting team to pull forward all the losses so that he could show how bad the situation was. Because obviously IBM was like a 400,000 person thing. So it's not like you just have to talk to 10 people and convince them there's a problem. So in order to do like really strong signaling around the fact that there is a problem, and that if we don't fix it, we're all, going to be gone. He actually declared more losses than what the accounting principles would have allowed him to kind of extend. And I think this kind of very strong symbolic gesture towards, we all have a problem and we're going to have to deal with it, is really, really important. But I'd love to spend a bit more time on that second piece. There's this, I don't know, fallacy, I guess, or maybe not. I wonder what you think, that you need to replace the entire management team to succeed in a restructure. Whereas you were just saying, actually, these people have the relationships, they have the know-how. You also want to pull them in. Like, where do you stand on this idea that the management team needs to go?
So look, I mean, I want to pick up on a point that Alex was mentioning earlier on about repurposing roles, and I think so Alex and I are personally really big fans of repurposing roles. So we're doing it not just in restructures and turnarounds. We also do it in sort of growth and diversification projects. So replacing people, Alex touched on it, is expensive in the sense that you have to pay out severance or end of service in our part of the world. But also your onboarding, learning curve, and integrating new people there is a cost to that. There's a massive cost to that. So if you're able to pick someone up from one area where either it's not serving the business or it's not in line with that particular person's skill set, and put them in another sort of area of the business that needs them more, or where they can use their skill set more, these people are already familiar with company culture, systems, the way around doing things, the product, the clients, the suppliers. All of that stuff is, can easily be learned, yes, but it takes time, and it's going to cost the business money at a time, in a phase where we don't have time or money. So the idea of replacing normal roles is an initial no, let's just see what we could do with this before we replace. And I think the same logic applies for management team. And if anything, it should apply even more for management team, because it's going to cost you even more money to get rid of them. And it's going to cost you more time to get someone on board and get them up and running to the level of what these people could do. Now, obviously, there are cases where
for sure.
it's not a salvageable situation. You've got someone who is just simply not aligned with business needs, is extremely resistant to change, or is for some reason or another extremely attached to the old way of doing things. There's little to no hope there, and it's got to be.
Well, for sure. I mean, it's a normal distribution curve, right? Like, you'll have 20% who are amazing and who are there for it and who are going to do everything they need. You got that 60% that you kind of have to push forward, repurpose, etc. And then surely there are 20% who are going to be like, listen, we tried. This isn't working out, for sure. But I think that's true even on a sunny day. Like, it's not about the restructuring piece. I think this is an ongoing thing to realize when someone is just not in the right place, whether you are struggling or not, is always important.
And Alex is particularly good at telling where you fall in that 20-60-20 from the first conversation. And it's really funny. It's really funny to see. I'll let him answer that, but it's really funny.
I want Alex to tell me.
It's so funny to hear his debrief between we can do something and no.
Yeah, no, I think when you look, I mean, it's your senses are not always 100% accurate, but there are some cues that you could definitely see. I mean, there could be some inconsistencies with what is being told versus you're doing your own fact finding. So before you start doing your interviews, you've already done your fact finding, right? So you've already started to go through and had an understanding of the company, and then you start coming to your interviews prepared. So your interviews are also a fact finding, but it's also, if you're more prepared when you come in there, then you're able to understand whether they actually have a grasp of the situation, they have a grasp of the role, they have a grasp of the hierarchy and where they are within the org structure. I think that there's visual cues as well. They always say that if you're able just to see the facial expression, so words and faces could see two different things. That's why it's always healthier to do these things in person, because you can really pick up on those cues as well. And I think that if you go through it enough times, you start being able to be more comfortable with being able to read situations and reading the individual, and just tapping into that intuition. So they always say that data is an important aspect, and data will tell you one side of the story. But the intuitive side, which comes through experience, and that doesn't necessarily mean restructuring experience, it's just in general, being able to read a situation and being able to understand and saying, certain red flags may come up in that process.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, yesterday we were giving a training. Essentially, 93% of communication cues are nonverbal. So what you're saying around being in that same room is really, really important. I guess I have another question which relates more to how do we communicate about all of this internally? I think when we look, like, all the books that I can think of that have to do with restructuring, or, one that I love particularly is called The Hard Things About Hard Things. They're all very American. And so it's all like, let's go out, tell everybody it's shit, and let's all band together. It's very Anglo-Saxon in its communication style. And I wonder, with your experience in the region here, like, if you listen to the Hard Things About Hard Things type of advice, it's like, go out, tell everybody we're failing. And then, like, there's a bit of that. And I'm sure that in a family business, like, I'm pretty sure that, the family are kind of a bit, require some more delicate ways of communicating and so on. I'd love to hear about, your experience in what does communication look like, internal comms particularly, but also reputation management externally look like in this region when we're managing a situation like that.
Old school, family businesses in this area of the world tend to be pretty old school in their thinking and their structure, and especially if it was founded by an older generation. So it was, do as you're told, do as I say and don't do as I do type of thing. I think here's the real challenge in first convincing ownership and management to approach this completely differently than what they would do previously, right? And I think that what it boils down to there is, listen, whatever you've done in the past has not worked, so let us do it, let us do it differently this time. I think that's the kind of, approach, what it boils down to. But I wouldn't maybe necessarily take it to the, extreme of the, American way, but there's definitely some buy-in that's required very, very on, and obviously the earlier the better, because you want these people to feel like they played a part in designing the way forward, and not just being imposed a new way of doing things, so early involvement, I think, is even more important than, how early you communicate is more important than necessarily how you're communicating. I think the timing is so essential. You need these people to feel like they weren't, broadsided by this news, right? You want to break it to them. You want to, and I think our introduction as Tandem, or as Alex and Rabih, in itself is like, oh, something's up here. These guys are here to help us with, our balance sheet. These guys are here to help us with a couple of things on, and that, slowly introduces the idea of, oh, we've got consultants coming on board to look at this. I felt that things weren't quite right, but now they're taking it seriously. And then you start talking to these people one-on-one, and kind of, you're talking about their pain points, and you're talking about, well, what suggestions would you have? Or what have you tried in the past that's worked? And what have you tried that's not worked? And what are the situations you've been in where you felt your hands were tied? How can we untie your hands in order to make this work? Some of it might be really obvious to us, and we don't necessarily need to jump through those hoops and go through those steps, but it is actually really necessary for them to feel like, oh, I played a part in designing this turnaround and this restructure, and therefore I have a vested interest, and rather than going to look for another job, I'm gonna, take the bull by the horns here and maybe look for another job in a year, but for the time being, I'm going to give this my best shot. Because you're going to ask people to do stuff that was outside of their job description, that's outside of their scope, for sure.
Yeah, I also think, just building on that, I mean, you're when you're speaking with anybody, if you're going to go to them with, brutal honesty about what's happening, there's always got to be the next layer of, okay, this is what we're doing about it. This is what we need your help in doing, and this is what you're going to get rewarded once we succeed in doing it. So I think that also it's them being part of that change process. But if you're asking them to work later than they're usually accustomed to working, or taking on different responsibilities than they're accustomed to doing, I mean, tying that sacrifice that they're making today with some outcome that they're going to be getting in the future, some future gratification that they're also working towards, is an important aspect. But definitely believe in the, having those transparent conversations, as long as, that roadmap has already been laid out, or at least the framework of that roadmap has been laid out, so that they understand that, look, this is not the end point. The end point is further down, and we need your help to go on this journey to reach that end point.
Yeah, I love that. I had a question actually about managing uncertainty, but you've kind of answered it, which is, how can you as a leader in a time of high uncertainty still maintain, optimism toward the future? So I guess I have a secondary question to that. A lot of the things you mentioned, rebranding some elements, bundling things, whatever it was, like coming up with really creative solutions for how to use your excess capacity, or, that requires creativity. And actually, human beings, contrary to common belief that, you know, we artists have to be suffering in order to create their best, you know, oeuvre, people are more creative when they're feeling safe in general. How do you maintain the creative process during a stressful time?
So if I jump on that, because I wouldn't take anything away from the founders. You know, they obviously had a creative vision, or they had that idea of what they were thinking about doing, right? So it's where the gap happens is that, you know, that vision that they had vis-a-vis the planning and outcomes, there was that execution gap, or there was that skill gap, or there was that misalignment. But I find by when talking with a lot of the founders of the company, you know, they had this idea of how they saw this company to be. So I think that a lot of the creative process definitely does come in the founders. And then obviously you can cascade it amongst all the different employees, but I would never discount the founders' vision, or even some of the employees or the early stage founders or the early stage employees that joined the company. Well, we had this idea, or we saw this company to be this way. I think as you're growing the company over time, by virtue of you doing, you know, great things within the company, you will come across some serendipitous moments, or these moments where, you know, or these accidental moments where it was like, oh, we can actually do this. We have the capabilities to redo this. Let's repurpose and let's retool, and we can head in this direction. And that's more opportunistic. But those opportunistic approaches can turn into, oh, this can actually be part of our core business portfolio. So a lot of it is unintended consequences. A lot of it is going back to the founder's original vision and trying to bring that into the new structure that we're planning.
That's a really great statement. I love that. I think
some of it. Sorry, I was just going to say, I think some of it is definitely serendipitous, and some of it is a lot less serendipitous, where things have been sitting in a drawer for a little while, and all it took was us putting people in a room. Us putting people in a room together, and someone says, "Oh, by the way, we know that hair product had too much fragrance in it." But we never, you know, it was put on the back burner because we could barely make salaries for the past couple of months. And we'd be like, oh, hold on. Well, you know, they were just saying that, you know, we could redo this, and you were just saying that we should redo this. And then it's serendipitous in the result, but in actual fact, these are initiatives that people had thought of before, that were put on the back burner, and this whole restructure turnaround thing reprioritized or reshaped the way people were looking at things. All of a sudden, we were explaining to them how important it was that your margins were at a certain level. And in order to do so, you needed to do a couple of things about it. And all they kept thinking about previously was, are we going to make payroll? How are we going to keep the lights on?
I love that. And what I love about your approach is that, again, like when we think about restructures, it's often like big boots coming in, let's change the way everything used to happen. And I think a lot of it is uncovering hidden value, be it from the original vision, be it from the initiatives that people, you know, closer to the product already knew were important. They were just never given the ability to execute them. And then just to help, of course, there were a lot of things that you brought as well. But I mean, it's also really beautiful to see this as more of a harmonious process of uncovering existing value as well and bringing that to light. I think that's a very different way to talk about restructurings than how we usually hear about them, right? And that's really great. We have a couple questions from the audience I'd like to bring in as well. One is, how do you address cultural differences when restructuring involves either the current merging or someone bought another company and as a consequence that things aren't working as well as they should have been working, merging those different organizational cultures?
So in this particular case of Evergreen, if I can continue to relate it back to this case study, it was more about merging the I don't want to say black and like the no BS consulting approach versus the family business, you know, this is how we were doing it before, and we have this many SKUs because we want, you know, that shelf real estate. It was more about merging those two cultures rather than two organizational cultures. And I think really sort of the takeaway from that is, listen, you don't have a choice here, right? Nobody wants to be in this situation, but we are where we are, and you don't have a choice but to kind of give this a shot. You've gone out of your way to bring in experts. You've gone out of your way to pay these experts, and you're kind of putting the whole organization on the line, or whatever's left of the organization on the line. So in that particular case, it was a little bit easier than, sort of, let's say, a marriage of two cultures. This was more of a, one has to take a precedent in some regards.
Yeah, I've also seen, just building on what Rabih saying, I mean, if you get the founder's approval or the founder's consent, that's really the most important in this, is that, you need, or the board in that particular case, depending on the structure, but whoever's making the decision. But going to the merger aspect of two different companies, two different countries, look, I've seen it happen where you have a company in one country acquiring a company in another country. And, they've decided, for example, to split the products between two different countries. You see two different cultures starting to emerge out of those. Where it becomes problematic is that if decision making is centralized in one country and not decentralized, in the sense of recognizing that there are now two VPs of sales, or there are now two different marketing departments, and we're trying to bring it all together into one, there has to be understanding of how previous company had worked vis-a-vis the other company, two different cultures. And I think that without that human element, it's very difficult to integrate the two together. You're going to find it with a lot of resistance. So I think that anybody that is in charge of doing that post-merger integration needs to really look at not just the process side, where there's synergies, how can we streamline, but do that whole cultural mapping of, well, in this country, not to generalize, but in this country, these are the type of, top, they believe more in, like, calling the person by their first name. Whereas in this country, it's always a Mr. or a Mrs. or some, however, with some form of respect. So they really need to understand the whole cultural mapping of the two different countries and the cultures within those countries in order to be able to approach it with some sensitivity. If that isn't part of the post-merger integration, I've seen them divest. I've seen these companies divest in the past where they tried to work it and it didn't work out.
Yeah. On that, there's a great book called The Culture Map, if anybody's struggling with differences in business cultures from one country to the next. One last question before we go to our rapid fire. I think it's also wonderful that we did 50 minutes of talking about restructuring and didn't talk about org restructuring. And I mean that not in an ironic way. I actually think, like, we think that org restructures are going to be like, oh, good, we'll just have people report to new people and this will magically fix itself. But still, it might be the case that in a restructuring, you do need to restructure the organization, not just move people into new roles, which is what you did, maybe in the early days, but at some moment, certainly when you have a new strategy and you're in your growth phase, or not. When's the right time to restructure?
Specifically the org structure?
Yes.
Only when you have a new strategy, mission, vision that the old structure doesn't serve. That's the only time I would do. Or obviously, if there are glaring inefficiencies and you have an extremely vertical structure that's not bringing any efficiency, those are just low-hanging fruits. But to actually entirely relook at the org structure, it needs to cascade down from the business objectives and the vision and mission of the business. It can be in itself a restructure just for the sake of restructuring.
I love that.
Just also building on what Rabih was saying. I mean, when you're doing your fact finding initially, I mean, that's one of the first things you look at. Okay, how does the org structure look like? How are the reporting lines? Does it make sense? Does this flow correctly? Are there blurry lines anywhere between the two? Is there room of changing that whole flow of communication to make it a bit easier? And that whole element we didn't really touch upon in terms of looking at the structure of the organization. But as Rabih was saying, if it makes sense, there's no need to change it unless the strategy requires it to change it. But if there are glaring inefficiencies within the org structure, that is definitely a starting point. The other thing that we had mentioned, the other thing just to touch on org structure, is that if you really look at the org structure, and a lot of what you're doing is customer facing, really the bottom of the org structure is really the most important. We used to take it and flip it upside down. I mean, if you want to look at it order of importance, that's a really important aspect, is that, you have your salespeople right at the bottom, with the people at the stores that are demonstrating the product, maybe right at the bottom, but the whole organization needs to be supportive of those specific functions. So in order of importance, try to flip it upside down and really support those roles.
I love how much sanity there is in your answers. Consultants can sometimes have a much, different answer to this question. So I am so happy to hear you say that. All right. With that, we come to our rapid fire, which is the closing of our session. I'm going to ask you to complete a sentence or answer with one short word. The first one is: great strategy is ...
Sustainable.
Implementable.
Great one. Implementable. That's right. If you can't execute the strategy, it's not that great. And if it's not going to carry you forward and it's a low, a short-term approach, then it's not that great either. And what is the one leadership quality that you think is most needed to improve on an organization's ability to execute?
Alex?
No, you go ahead, Rabih.
For me, it's the ability to recognize a gap and sort of seek support in filling that gap, right? So for me, yeah. So for me, a founder or a leader who's able to recognize a gap within his organization or within his own skill set and then sort of go out of his way to fill it is a true leadership. I mean, buying time and faking it till you make it is just not when there's an organization.
You're not a fan of those. I see you're not a fan.
matching tasks with skills. That would be an important
great one. Like casting, essentially.
Yeah.
Nice. That's a good one.
I like that. Yeah.
Great answers, guys. I love it. Well, before we go, we're almost on the hour. I really want to thank you. I learned a lot. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure the audience follows, but I always say, like, when I enjoy them, I know for a fact that the audience did. I learned so much in our conversation. I really love your very kind of hands-on and down-to-earth approach. So I'm very, very grateful that you made time for us today.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Marlene.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us.
And as always, thanks to our attendees and your questions. There's a couple we didn't get a chance to answer, but I'll tag you guys. Maybe you can get to them in writing. This video will be available on our pages, on our YouTube, on our website very shortly, and in podcast format. Of course, all of our sessions are free to attend, but if you find this session valuable, you can give back in two ways. You can donate to the Cosmic Centers Fund, which is dedicated to supporting women in Lebanon re-enter the workforce. And this month and next, we also have members of our community that are in Gaza particularly. So we'll be directing all of the funds towards them. You can also donate something back by giving us 15 minutes of your time and taking our Future of Teams survey. All of these links are in the comments. And of course, do join us on our website, subscribe to our newsletter, and make sure you don't miss out on anything. And then to wrap this up, we will be having our closing session for the conference this Friday, November 10th at 2 p.m. And in it, I'll be speaking to Joe Santos, who was my professor at INSEAD and a mentor. And it's the fourth year in a row that he returns to the Cosmic Conference as our closing speaker. We're very excited about that, and we invite you all to join us. Thank you again for being with us here today, and we hope to see you soon.